They paid me $1,500, make 40 pieces of content. That was the requirement to get paid. And I needed money at the time. I was like, yes, $1,500 is great. Start profile from 0 followers, had a video go viral. 150,000 people follow me in like a week. It was crazy.
Good girl to wild woman. What is that?
Yeah, I was the certified good girl. Me stepping in deeper into the wild woman is like owning all parts of me. The parts of me that love to play, that are sensual, that are sexual.
I did ayahuasca, I did ibogaine, I did bofu. And let's dive all into that.
Yeah, okay. This is such an exciting conversation. So,
Tori, how did you become hella famous on TikTok? Let's just start there.
It's kind of a crazy story. So it happened during COVID. So in 2019, I started my business, and it was the first time I ever started using social media for anything other than my just like personal use. And I started like many people on Instagram, and it was like a hard transition because everyone had just known me as Tori, and now I'm trying to be taken seriously in a different like industry, and trying to switch my content felt clunky and weird. And so it was 2020, we were in lockdown, and I got this, what I thought was a spam email from TikTok. And for God knows why, I actually read it and opened it. And they were talking about this fund. They said it was like it's called the Creative Learning Fund that they launched then. So back then, which is not that long ago, but 3 years ago, 2020 was, it was just transitioning from just a dance platform to more, they were trying to bring other creators to be experts in different fields instead of just having a bunch of kids on the platform. So what they did was created something called the Creative Learning Fund, and they went out and hand selected creators to try and create content that educated people from home, because everybody was stuck at home and couldn't do anything. So basically, somehow I got into this fund. They paid me $1,500 to start a profile from 0 followers. There was nothing happening on the back end to help me, but basically it was a program of basically saying, I'll help you to teach you how to make a TikTok and use the platform. And what they told me is basically make 40 pieces of content. That was the requirement to get paid. And I needed money at the time. I was like, yes, $1,500 is great. So I will make 40 videos, and then they'll pay me. So I did. And those 40 videos were how I kind of got comfortable sharing my story and talking about what was going on in my life. And I knew when I got on the platform, I was like, this is my opportunity to be seen as, not necessarily an expert in my field, but like I can essentially be whoever I want to be on this platform, because I don't know anyone else who's on TikTok. Like none of my friends were on TikTok.
I was not.
Yeah. No one was playing with it like that. So I felt this like permission to kind of just do whatever. And I wasn't really scared of people judging me like I was on Instagram. So what happened in that first like month and a half, I had a video go viral. And I remember going to bed one night, and it had like viral, meaning like it had 15,000 views when I went to sleep. And I woke up and it had like 150, and I had like 15,000 new followers. And then I remember one time I went from like 100,000 to like, I had 150,000 people follow me in like a week. It was crazy. And literally all I was doing was just going on walks, because that was all we could do during COVID. That was all I was allowed to do.
If that.
And I would just go outside and record myself talking about what I was going through, what I was learning, things I was reading. And I think partially it blew up. It was people related to what I was talking about. I was real and raw in a way I wasn't on my other social media platforms. And I think people were in a time where they needed hope, and they needed, something positive, because there was just so much bad news, and so many people were down. So I think partially I got lucky in terms of timing when I joined TikTok, but also I think people really related to the content. And so I was fortunate to be able to take advantage of the algorithm and the success quickly. But I was one of those people that built a lot of success overnight. And then I was like, what do I do with it?
Do you think someone who's trying to replicate that, right? Replicate what you did, is there any tips or tricks or like steps to follow that you think can happen? Or do you think it was more you?
I do think there are strategies you can utilize to create good content. And, the algorithm isn't biased. There's still opportunity for everybody. It's still really early on the platform. Even though it seems like it's been around for a little while. And so there are things you can do to really hook people, to get people's attention, to be creative. But for me, I think my edge was my authenticity and like my realness. And TikTok's different than other platforms because people can like smell through the bullshit. Like, I don't know, they can just like feel when it's fake and curated. And they want a level of kind of transparency that isn't necessarily required on other platforms. So I think that's what I lead with. And actually, as I've stepped away from that type of content creation and I've gotten more strategic as I built a team and I've had other people help me, the further I get away from actually the content itself, the worse it performs. So when it's curated and it's like every piece looks exactly the same or it looks exactly like everyone else's content, people can kind of feel that. And for me, it just doesn't land as much. So I'm trying now, even though I have a ton of success, trying to actually get back to the basics of what worked at the beginning.
Yeah, like raw content.
Just raw camera, me talking, being honest, and letting people into my world because you don't get that look into people's worlds in the same way.
So you have a massive TikTok. We all know that. You also have a massive podcast. And what do you think is the key to a massive podcast? Is it more so the guests? Is it more so how you speak? I think it's a hard thing to do. It's not easy. In fact, we were talking about this earlier. It's hard to build a really good, engaged, big, organic audience. So is there anything different with the podcast that you did versus the TikTok, or is it similar?
Yeah, I think for the podcast, I started it from sort of a selfish position of wanting to bottle up conversations and wisdom from people I respected and admired. And I figured if I did and I was interested in these conversations and they were transforming my life, I figured it could probably help someone else. So that's why I initially started it. But quickly I realized that I have innately an ability to build relationships with people. And I was like, okay, if I can strategically create relationships with people I admire, those people are connected with other people that I might not ever have an opportunity to meet. So it started really with this intention of like, how do I get myself in rooms I would never, ever have a chance to belong in? And it became sort of this game of like, how far can I go with it? How many amazing people can I interview? And from there, it's been one of the best networking things I could do. But also I leveraged TikTok in order to grow that following. So I strategically created content on TikTok talking about the conversations that I was having, giving some behind the scenes, talking about my own personal story, telling that in ways that I knew would intrigue and pique people's curiosity. And then I would tell them, like, if you want more or you want to know the end of the story, like go to my podcast. So I use TikTok as a filtration system to get people off the platform who are already really into my content and then get them to listen to the show. And this year in April, we signed a contract with Blue Wire, which is at the Wynn here in Las Vegas. And we did a strategic deal with them. But on top of that, I created a piece of content on TikTok and it went super viral. It got multiple millions of views. And what I realize now that did was, one, it introduced people to who I was and my story. And it told people that I was a podcast host in the first 10 seconds of the video. And because that video did so well, we hit #1 in education podcasts across all podcasts. And so it's me being authentic and being myself and really asking questions and having conversations that are meaningful to me, but it's also strategic. I mean, I'm leveraging the audience and the base of fans that I've built with the intention to have a larger conversation and bring them over to the podcast. And that's worked really, really well for me.
You also have a coaching business, right? Mm-hmm. What do you typically help the clients with? Are you helping them more with the business aspects? Is it mindset? Is it both? What are you typically helping them with?
Yeah, it's typically a lot of mindset work and then what I call embodiment and integration. So I say a lot, like I work with high level leaders and a lot of them come to me because some area of their life isn't feeling the way they want it to. They've usually accomplished a lot, had a lot of success, but on the outside, things look really good, but on the inside, they are either miserable, depressed, burned out, something of that sort. And so typically what I work with people is to identify the root cause of where things are going wrong and how can they live in alignment with their purpose and their truth and their mission, but from a place of like internal integrity and embodied awareness. Like for me, I help people get out of their head, especially big business leaders. Like they're so logical and they're using their left brain thinkers, but part of it, and we're moving into a culture where like we need heart-led leaders. We can't just be taking, like it's not a power over culture anymore. Like we need people who are in touch with their emotions, that are leading with integrity with their heart. And so I work primarily with people who really feel like they have a purpose and a mission in this world, and they want to live it out and make a big impact, but they want to do from a place of inner alignment. And so that's kind of what I help people with is how do I create an inner world of peace and prosperity and abundance and see that externalized in my outer world. So it's really about identifying the core wounds that are keeping them stuck so that they can create the life and business that they want to have.
I saw you talk about the good girl to wild woman. What is that?
Yeah. So this is a conversation I've been having a lot with people in my community, but also my clients lately. So I grew up in the Bible Belt, Alabama. I was a straight A student, MVP of every sports team I ever was on. I was the lead in the play. I was the certified good girl. I was led in my church. I thought I was going to go into ministry when I was younger. And I took a lot of pride as I got older in being kind of this girl next door that everybody kind of liked and spoke highly of. And so I got kind of pigeonholed. I pigeonholed myself into really caring a lot about what other people thought of me. And other people's perception, I didn't realize at the time, was like the number one thing. I was like trying to always manage and control people's perspective and perception of me. And then over the last several years, I realized how limiting that was and how suffocating it was and exhausting it was to constantly filter and monitor myself based on who I thought I needed to be in order to be loved and accepted and quote unquote good enough. So the wild woman archetype is something I believe we all as women have within us, but many of us have not tapped into, which is the woman who knows deeply who she is, who is not concerned about, not necessarily like I'm here to rub people the wrong way, but I'm here to authentically live as myself. And if that triggers you, that's for you to deal with. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean something about me. So part of me stepping in deeper into the wild woman is like owning all parts of me, the parts of me that love to play, that are sensual, that are sexual, that are like hard ass working, that are competitive, but also soft. And it's like, how do I allow and make room and space for all of those parts of me to exist, that they're acceptable, that they're lovable, and that I don't have to perform and be someone I'm not in order to fit in. Because the wild woman stands in all of her power and all of her glory and owns that. And so over the past few years, I've been kind of peeling away the layers of conditioning and programming that have told me I needed to be a certain way in order to be good enough or to be successful. And I'm finding my own path and kind of figuring out what works for me, what feels good for me, what's important to me versus what I've always been told is important.
This past summer, I did 3 different psychedelics. I did ayahuasca, I did ibogaine, and did bofu, which was like way outside my normal zone. So you're obviously very into that. I'm curious, what got you into that? And then what psychedelics do you recommend for people, if any? Like, I mean, let's dive all into that.
Okay. This is such an exciting conversation. So my journey to psychedelics is interesting because if you had asked me a couple years ago if that would be me, I would be so judgmental. I would be like, never. Are you kidding me? Drugs? I'm the good girl. The good girl does not do drugs. The girl does not experiment with anything like this. But like many people who feel called to deeper levels of self-awareness and self-mastery and healing, I went through a lot of hard stuff. So a long story short, in a few years, I lost my mom, my sister, and all of my living grandparents and uncle. Both my mom and my sister to cancer. And I also lived through a massive F4 tornado that killed hundreds of people in my town and destroyed our family home. So I had a lot of trauma that I buried and just endured for several years. And I buried it with work and performance. And I was like, if I can distract myself and I continue to be good in these areas, then I'll be okay. What I've learned is you can't run from yourself, and wherever you go, there you are. And you will take all of your unresolved problems and issues and traumas with you. And so eventually it came to a head, and I realized after my mom passed away in 2018 that this was now an invitation for me to look deeper at the things I'd have been avoiding and running from. And like many people, I sought therapy, I sought counseling, I sought mentorship. I read a lot of self-help books. I listened to podcasts. I developed a lot of self-awareness, but ultimately I continued to feel stuck. And that's because I hadn't I'd had a lot of mental awareness, but I hadn't connected that to my body and into my heart. And so I had this invitation from a shaman and a therapist that I worked with actually in Atlanta. And they were offering psilocybin ceremonies. And for those that don't know, that's magic mushrooms. And I was in a place where I was desperate and I was really seeking an internal shift. And I'm somebody that follows my curiosity. And I sort of believe that whatever you're seeking is also seeking you. And so if someone's listening to this and they've never even considered it, this might be the first time they're hearing about something like this as an alternative method to healing. But something had started to come into my world, and I started to pay attention and get curious about it. And then there was this opportunity to go and sit in ceremony, what we call ceremony. And so I went and I met with the therapist and the shaman, and I talked to them about what I was going through, and they told me what to expect. And I went to this ceremony with about 5 other women and did psilocybin for the first time. And it cracked me wide open in ways I had, are hard to put into words in many ways. But that started a series of sessions that I did with the medicine. And I can say has been some of the deepest, most profound healing and personal growth work I have still done to this date. Because what happens with psilocybin is the compound itself allows your brain, which is hardwired, to become more malleable. So the neural pathways that are grooved and have been ingrained over years and years of conditioning loosen. And so you're able to develop new neural connections within your brain. So things and experiences or traumas or past memories that have been really, really hard that you've never, you're afraid to revisit, and you don't think, oh, I don't want to go there. It allows for you to experience it and process it in a new way. And just to give you an example, in that first ceremony, because what happens in ceremony is you take the medicine and you have a completely inner journey. So I had an eye mask on for 4 hours, and there's a whole internal world in there that I had never explored, had never known about. Because of our 5 senses, we're always looking out at the world. It's sending all of us and all of our energy and our attention and awareness outside. And so with that blindfold, all of that went in, and my subconscious mind started bringing up all of these things. And so at one point in the ceremony, I was revisiting a memory from my childhood when I was about 2 years old, that I had repressed, and I was like crying myself to sleep, and I was calling out for my mom. And I was like, where are you? Where are you? Like, I need you. And lo and behold, like she was at work. It wasn't like she'd abandoned me or anything, but me as a little 2-year-old was like crying out for my mom. Like, I need you. Where are you? Why won't you come to me? Like, please, I need you. And it's so real. As I say that, I can still feel the power of it. And, as a 2-year-old, I cried myself to sleep that night. But in the ceremony, I was crying and I was processing through that. And the therapist, she didn't know what I was thinking or what I was going through, but she just put her hand on my heart. And it was like this full circle moment. I just like grabbed her hand and it was like, I'm here. I could feel, and this is after my mom had passed, and I felt her presence and it was like, I'm here. I'm right here. I haven't left you. And I was able to complete that cycle of what had been lodged in my body and in my psyche as like this horrible moment of feeling abandoned. It was like this coming home of like, oh, I can relax. Like, you're here and I'm supported, I'm loved, and you didn't forget me. And so that's just one example of many experiences that I've had. And psilocybin's a really beautiful medicine. I've also worked with MDMA, which is incredible. Most people think of it as ecstasy or Molly, which is done in like a very social, or like club or festival experience, which to each their own. Like, I've had experiences like that and they've been really, really beautiful. But in a therapeutic environment, it's also profound. It's on the cusp of being legalized, for therapeutic use. And what happens with MDMA is you're able to similarly process past traumatic events, but instead of fear, you experience it with such a level of safety and love that you're able to process and feel the feelings that never got processed, and you're able to release those. So you come out so much lighter, but also you're able to like see from a different vantage point and perspective. So that's been really profound. And then most recently I started doing ketamine therapy, which is, and just by the way, I'm not telling anybody to do any of these things. This is not me saying you need to go out and do this. This is my personal experience and journey. But ketamine is a legal psychedelic that's, I met a holistic psychiatrist here in Vegas, and since then started ketamine therapy at home. And it is amazing. It's one of the best ways to address depression that is like resistant, medication that's resistant to depression. So depression that's resistant to medication. So if you are continually feeling like you've got some anxiety or depression, like ketamine might be something you want to look at. And basically what happens in ketamine therapy, they call it medicine assisted meditation. And so I take this at home for like an hour. It goes through my system and I'm able to have a really deep, profound, like meditative, peaceful experience, but I'm also able to have that perspective shift. So the first time I ever did it was like, I was seeing my circumstances, my surroundings through a certain lens, maybe through judgment or fear. Like, I was just like experiencing resistance. And the first ketamine journey I ever did, it just kind of showed me like life is like a coin. And I was seeing everything from the perspective of tails, right? Like I was seeing all of this through the lens of fear, scarcity, and when I did the ketamine, it was able to give me the shift of like, oh, now everything is on heads. I was like reoriented. I was like, oh, I can see things right side up. Things are clear that hadn't been clear before. And so it brings you just a profound level of peace and like relief when you realize, oh, it's like, I'm okay. Like so many people, and this is what I work with my clients now, not just on the mindset, but also the integration and with medicine work is like, we all want the same things. Like we want stress, anxiety is a byproduct of thinking and believing that we're not going to be okay. And what the medicine has taught me, whatever medicine that might be, regardless of if it's psychedelic or breath work or meditation or yoga or all these things, it's been a process of coming home to a remembering that like, I am okay and I'm going to be okay. Even when my life and my world seems so chaotic and hard and tragic and difficult, it's like an inner sense of peace that like, no matter what's happening around me, my peace isn't dependent on my circumstances being perfect. My peace is a place that I can go within myself. It's a remembering that I come from love and I will return to love. And every single moment of my day is like when I move into fear and stress and anxiety, I've just forgotten that everything's really okay. And I'm not saying everything's ideal.
Right.
I'm not saying it's everything you want all the time. Like I didn't want my mom, my sister to die, but I've come to a place that it can be okay. And that to me is real power. And that to me is real peace. And that's what the medicine's given me.
For people who are listening who haven't done it, the way I describe it is I'll say like ayahuasca and psilocybin, they felt very similar to me for, I don't know if you did ayahuasca, but it's very similar, felt similar to me. It feels like I'm talking to maybe my older, more mature self. That's how I described it so people could maybe understand it. If you're explaining to someone who's never done it, because I think it's very hard to put into words.
It is.
Is there a different way that you would describe it?
I have not done ayahuasca, but I feel like it probably will happen at some point when the moment's right. For me, psilocybin, there's a spirit to the medicine. You know, it's a plant medicine. It comes from, it's indigenous. It's got a long history. Comes from the intelligence of our earth. Our earth is intelligent. And so there is a wisdom that you tap into and a spirit that you tapped into the medicine that I believe is a teacher. It's like, it's trying to teach you and show you something about life in the way, not necessarily it should be lived, but like it's this illuminating thing that where maybe you can see your life or your perspective from in a way that you never saw it before. And we talked about this and, you know, you were just on my show and we talked about this. Then it's like perspective is everything. You know, if you're climbing a mountain and you're on, you know, you're only halfway up, like your view is going to be a lot different than if you are on a different side of the mountain or if you're at the top of the mountain, right? And it's like, you can only see so much from certain perspectives and certain vantage points. And for me, the power is in being able to change your view of something. Why is his name leaving me? Wayne Dyer says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And so for me, psychedelics have been one of the biggest catalysts in helping me change the way I look at my external experiences, the people in my life, the things I've gone through, and reorient in a way that brings me more peace and love and joy and ultimately like inner peace, which I think in the big scheme of things, why do we do what we do? Why do we care so much about making money or making an impact or building a big business? It's like, for me, I realized so many of the things I was pursuing in my world, in my life, were because I thought it was going to give me a certain feeling. It's like when I get here, then I'll feel this. When I have this type of relationship, then I'll feel loved and connected. When I make this amount of money, then I'll feel safe and secure. And what I realized is not about the accumulation of things. It's how do I find that feeling and access that feeling within myself? Not because otherwise what I'm doing is I'm trying to control my circumstances 24/7. I'm trying to manipulate circumstance and make it just the way I want it so I can feel a certain way. But if that's the case, then I'm always at the mercy of that changing. And if that person leaves me or that person quits and or my bank, you know, a pandemic hits, what happens? Is my peace and my happiness dependent on circumstance, or is peace and happiness, true peace and happiness, available to you despite circumstance? It's when I can be okay no matter what's happening around me. I'm not saying I don't have challenges. I'm not saying I don't struggle, but I don't feel like I'm a victim to my life. And I feel like I've stopped chasing this idealized way, like life that I think my happiness exists in the future somewhere. I realize like, I'm really okay right now as I am. And as when I live from that place, all of the things I really desire naturally and more effortlessly come into my life instead of chasing and forcing things to be a certain way.
I have a pretty, I'd say, large circle of like affluent male business owners. And until recently, I got in a desperate spot. And that's why I tried plant medicine. It seems to me, and I'd be curious on your point, in the mindset world, at least from my perspective, and maybe some of like my circle of friends, that the mindset or like plant medicine world can sometimes attract, I don't know how to say it, maybe people who are out there a little bit where it's almost like a little too much. Then it almost seems that the people who, I don't want to say normal, it's probably not the right word, but they're doing it, but they don't talk about it as much. Do you think there's a reason why that stuff maybe attracts those certain individuals, or, why it maybe has that type of like, I guess, facelift? Because I think for me, I was very hesitant for a long time because I'd always see people kind of out there and I'd see crazy stories. And I'm like, that is just weird. And then when I did it, I had a very different perspective. But I don't know, speak to that, because I'm curious on your perspective, because you're much more into it than I am.
So I definitely relate. And I think a lot of people probably do too. And it can get a bad rep and a bad name, and anything can be bastardized, right? And anybody can swing so far to one side of the pendulum that it can be abused. It can be become a coping strategy. It can become something you're dependent on. It can become like a form of escape versus a form of healing and therapy and integration. So I think, with anything, if people are skeptical, that's okay. I was too. But with anything, do your due diligence. Don't always, judge a book by its cover, if you will. The reason why I'm proud of the platform I've built and the way I try to share this work with people, because I want it to be relatable. I want to lower the barrier to entry for people to feel like they can ask questions if they have, that they can have safe places where they can get curious about this, because otherwise you're just seeing what's out there and you're making your own assumption or judgment about it. And sometimes the people that are representing the medicine and the spiritual community, like the fear comes up. It's like, oh, I don't want to go off the deep end, or I don't want to lose myself, or I don't want to end up too like woo woo. And I don't know what's going to happen. And I think that comes from this fear of uncertainty of like, what's going to happen? And this loss of control that for a lot of us, we've intentionally curated a level of control in our lives because that feels good and it gives us power over things. Yet I think the medicine sort of sets a level playing field for everybody. There's no hierarchy of better or worse than. It's like we're all human beings, like really doing the best we can. And so for me, I try to share on my platforms is like, it's not just for the super spiritual. It's not just for the people like who wear mala beads and like hang out in Tulum. It's not it's for the person who has a real intention to connect with themselves and to know themselves on a deeper level. And that there are people doing it safely in safe containers and legal places where we're having honest, real conversations about these modalities and giving people a safe place to try them if that's something they feel called to. And for me, it's never about pushing anything on anybody. I'm not trying to sell people on the fact that they should do psychedelics by any means, but I share my personal experience and what's worked for me. And I want to give people hope that they can go through some really challenging things, and everybody has their own version of adversity that they've experienced. And have hope that they can get through it, that there is a bright side, that there is a silver lining, that you can take your deepest pain and you can really transform that into purpose and service and meaning, and find fulfillment and satisfaction in life again. Because regardless of how successful you are, I've met a lot of ultra successful people who are some of the most miserable people that I know.
It's true.
And so what's the point of all of that external gratification and success and awards if we're at war with ourselves? And so regardless of the modality or the medicine, I just want to curate safe spaces for people to be honest with themselves about how they're actually doing.
There's a group of people who will say that by admitting you might have depression or trauma, you're actually creating a bigger problem because you're saying it exists, like it's real, right? What's the balance? What's the balance between maybe you actually have a problem and then, if you're always blaming that problem maybe for the actions you take, is there a balance? What would you say to those types of people?
Yeah, I don't think, I think one, it's natural to want to avoid things that are painful. Our brains are built to avoid pain and pursue pleasure. So I very much understand the desire to not acknowledge the hard, painful things that we've been through because they're hard and they're painful. But I was a person that really tried to run from my stuff. I really tried to distract myself and numb and avoid and work my way out of my past. But it kept following me, even in the most subtle ways. It would show up in my relationships. It would show up in my resentment, my bitterness, my anger that I would pretend I didn't have. I spent so much energy and effort trying to mask those things and push it down. The way I describe that to people is like your trauma. First of all, trauma doesn't discriminate. Doesn't care if you're white, doesn't care if you were born in an affluent neighborhood, doesn't care where you come from. Everyone has experienced trauma on some level, whether it's big or quote unquote small. And there's no hierarchy. So, but avoiding it or acting like it doesn't exist it's like holding a beach ball underwater. That takes a lot of effort and it naturally wants to come to the surface. And you can spend your whole life distracting yourself, pretending, bypassing it, putting on a strong face and being like, I'm not weak. You can be like, everything happens for a reason and just bypass it or like whatever. But that takes so much energy. And for me, I was the person that would put my head on my pillow at night and be like, okay, I am okay. Like I'd have to talk myself into it. Like I am in a happy relationship. Like I am happy. Like you don't have to talk yourself into something that's true, And so when I realized I was lying to myself and that I was this thing I was avoiding wanted to come up, I tried to like do what was natural, not necessarily what's normal. What's normal is avoid, numb, distract, pretend, lie, fake, play the role, act like you've got it all together. And I was really good at it. But there came a time where I had to face myself and look at myself in the mirror. And did I like who I saw? Was I honest? Was I real? And the answer was no. And then there was just a moment I was like, what's all this for? What does it matter if everyone else thinks I'm okay if I know I'm not? And I think it takes a lot of strength. I think it takes a ton of courage, to be honest. Courage, the root word cur means heart. It means that you live and you lead and like you're honest enough to like speak from your heart. And if men and women of all ages across this globe had the courage to use their voice to speak their heart, I think we'd have, a much different world that we live in, but we're so scared of everyone's judgment. We're scared of our own judgment of what do people think? What do I think about myself if I'm not honest? And that's why a lot of people have a lot of skeletons in their closet they live with. And for me, I just had to completely reorient and realize what's normal is actually a sick society. It's not a healthy society. So what I wanted to get back to what was natural. And what's natural is that thing that I was pushing down, the ball that I'm holding under water, it wants to come up. So how can I learn to let it come up? And it's almost like a wave. So if I actually feel it, if I actually experience it, it will crest and it will dissipate and it actually will leave instead of holding it on and carrying it with you. And that's why so many people have we talk about emotional baggage, the last thing I'll say on that is, like, I told you briefly that I lived through a tornado, and after the tornado passed, our entire town was completely destroyed. And I walked outside, and for years, our town was never the same. But what happens when a storm comes through is you go and you pick up and you start to clear things away and clear the debris. And what I realized is most of us, all of us, live through emotional storms all the time. And the first time an emotional storm comes through, maybe your parents get divorced, maybe you get your heart broken, you get an F on a test, whatever it is, there leaves all this emotional debris and no one teaches you how to pick it up. So it stays there. And then the next storm comes through inevitably, and maybe you get laid off or you have $600 to your name or whatever. And then more emotional debris, and it piles and it stacks on top of each other. And the people that come to work with me typically have emotional debris that's up to here. And they're like, Tori, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I want to be able to enjoy my life again. I want to feel vital and strong. And I want to feel what it feels like to be happy again and feel my body and feel alive. But like, I'm up to here. And so the process that I take people through, and I think owning and being honest about our trauma, is a process of beginning to clear that emotional debris.
Where do you draw the line between just doing what needs to be done and then mindset work?
Mm-hmm.
Because, there are some hard things like, going to the gym, like sometimes it's not fun. You just have to do it, or building the business. Is there a way to draw that line where people actually know, hey, I just need to get this done, and then, hey, maybe this is something I need to mentally work on?
Yeah. Here's the thing. We all have to do things we don't want to do, and the best things in life come from doing things most other people avoid. So yes, there are responsibilities that every single one of us have that life kind of requires us to show up for. But I think for many people that can be an excuse for not making or taking time to do the other inner work. Again, it's like this outward facing orientation to like what it has to get done. What is my to-do list? What are the things I'm responsible for? And let me just show up every day and react to my life. I'm reacting to the emails. I'm reacting to the responsibilities. I'm reacting to what life is demanding of me. And part of shifting into an empowered place is realizing I have choice. Like, I have sovereignty. I get to decide what I'm going to give my time, energy, and attention to. And I just interviewed Jim Quick, and I've been saying this a lot because he says it. And he said, life is the C between B and D. B is your birth, D is death, and C is what it fundamentally means to be human, which is choice. Every single one of us get a choice. Even you might be in a relationship or in a business partnership or something, and you're like, I'm stuck. Like, I have to do this. I've worked this hard. I have 60 employees, and I'm stuck, and there's no way out, or I have to do this. And I'm like, do you have to? Or do you choose to? No one's forcing you. No one has a gun to your head and is making you do that. On some level, you're choosing it. And that's okay. But just be honest about why. There's a cost and a payoff to everything. There is a payoff for showing up and being responsible and doing what needs to get done. Absolutely. But there's also a cost to neglecting your inner world and being honest. And no one's going to suffer from that more than you. And then your family, and then your children, and then your relationships. And I want to live in a world where like people don't suffer unnecessarily. Like, life is hard enough. People are going to, like, life will hurt you. You will get dealt cards you didn't expect. We didn't certainly expect cancer to enter our family. We didn't expect a tornado to wipe out our town. It did. Life will be uncertain. But how do I control what I can control? my reaction, my response. I get to choose what I'm going to do about it. And that's what I think personally it means to be radically responsible for your life and your results. And when you realize that all the external things don't fix your internal problems, then that's typically where people hit a crossroads and finally start to do some of that inner work.
Tori, thank you so much for sharing everything. It's been like inspiring and enlightening, even just hearing about your story and what you've been through. For anyone listening, like, where can they connect with you? Where can they find you?
Yeah. Thank you for having me and just creating a space to have a real conversation. That's what I like to do most. So if you want to learn more about me, you can go to torigordon.com or hang out with me on social media on TikTok and Instagram. I'm the Tori Gordon. Please feel free to DM me. Let me know that you heard about me from this podcast. I'd love to connect with you. And I also have a podcast called The Coachable Podcast. Tanner is also on there. So make sure you check out our episode as well. And that's where you can learn more about what I'm up to. So thank you.
Welcome. Thanks.